Thank you, thank you. All right. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing after lunch? I'm glad it wasn't lasagna, you know. So I'm speaking about courageous inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging. And I'm speaking to you from let's see if it works here, from a spot of a lot of privilege. I'm the white guy, fifth generation Cornellian, son of, just mentioned, my Ken Blanchard, my dad, president of our company, and and I'm honored and pleased because of the privilege that I've been granted, but then also earned. And when COVID happened, and when the illegal killing of George Floyd occurred, and this cultural revolution, sort of like enveloped, this country and the world, I was really kind of whacked out a bit for a couple of reasons. One is, I work for a business. We do great things, in the world, and I found myself in a position of really trying to figure out, what have I done or not done, like along the way, and really trying to deal with this incredible, thing that was happening, and all the clients that we deal with, we're all dealing with this, incredible inequity and kind of the reverberations that it was having, through our society and, and through work, and it was a lot of reckoning, for me, and my daughter Hannah. She's told me for years that, as a white male, late 50s, with your privilege, like your voice is not as interesting and welcome right now because there's so many other voices that have been quieted over the years. And so, and I have my voice, and I was figuring out, how do I use it? Do I just shut up? Do I listen? What was going on? What were the implications for, for our business? And then probably more than that were, what were the implications for organizations and for leadership? Because I've always known that when you lead somebody, you are in a position that can quite literally devastate or ruin their lives. It's through, a toxic work environment, through, somebody being, oppressed by a boss in a job that they have to have, that puts a lot of strain on people. It shows up with people going home and talking about it over the dinner table, and then especially when it was all happening with COVID. So there was a big set of questions, around that. And so at the same time as a company, we were pivoting big time to try to stay alive, from 5,000 to 6,000 classroom sessions a year to we didn't do one for 18 months, and we pivoted to virtual quickly and a lot of other things. And so I still remain kind of confused about how to kind of enter the conversation or what to do, as we were also working feverishly to develop more kind of integrated, inclusion content, skills, and mindset into our leadership training. Because every client that we're working with, they were saying, listen, this is front and center. This is critical. We need to address this issue for our employees, for our leaders, because of the pressure from outside, but also because it's the right thing to do. And there was just a lot of pressure. So pressure is kind of what it was. I was really feeling. So I went to a conference. It was the first one that was live. So this is in. It was during one of the kind of the downturns. I can't remember when it was. I think it was early 2022. No, it was late 2021. It was a conference in Louisville, and I'm going to talk about it because it represented a profound and really powerful shift for me, and kind of why I'm here, today in many ways. And so the guy in front of me was Darryl McDaniel. Anybody know who that is? DMC. He's the DMC part of Run DMC, right? And so, basically those guys, along with the guys in LA, kind of simultaneously invented, rap, hip hop back in the 80s. And it's a leadership conference in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm like, what's DMC doing on the thing talk at a leadership conference? So anyway, I sat there and I listened to the most amazing story that he was talking about. And he had written a book called 10 Ways to Not Commit Suicide, like a real crazy title. And he talked about, through their rise of kind of inventing this genre of music and kind of creating all this buzz. And then they didn't quite go on decline because everything picked up around them. And then they had this moment when they partnered up with Aerosmith, the old white guys that I grew up with as a kid listening to, and they did this collaboration on Walk This Way, and it put them right back to the top, and it was just an amazing period. And right as they got to the top, and he was like coming back from their tour, he went into this crazy depression, like right down, like he couldn't leave his home, and he talked about what happened and the story around that, and weirdly, Sarah McLachlan was part of the story because she wrote this album, and he listened to this album every day for a year as he sort of pulled out of this thing. So his reason for being there was talking about mental health and how it's been stigmatized, forever, and it's just a really, really hard thing. And he, like some other people of note, have been talking about it recently. And it was really, really refreshing and just really powerful. And so when he was done, he said, what often happens is I'll finish up and then people will walk up to me and they'll come up and they'll be like, you're talking about me. Or that's my son. Or that's my wife. Or that's my mother, or that's whoever, right? And he's like, and it was always this kind of a thing where they would talk about it. And it's what I realized as I went up to talk to him is it was me. And it was like, that's my son. And I've got a son that's really struggled with mental health and addiction. And, and I've always been there for him. We've got this amazing relationship. He's doing really well now. But there was like a stigmatized thing that we were sort of allowing, and that I wasn't speaking about it, and then people would have, conversations, around mental health, and I just wasn't surfacing kind of what was going on, wasn't being truthful, wasn't advocating, for him or for myself or for my family, or even bringing anybody into an understanding of the, how hard it been for me to be, on my knees at different points. And so I decided at that point that I was going to talk about it. And then the other piece that was really interesting is the other thing that I talk about, I always talked about selectively, is my daughter Hannah, who's gay, and she's married, and we've got an amazing, baby now, Nora, and she's married to a wonderful attorney from New Jersey, really strong. Jewish family. Hannah's Jewish by blood, but not by her heritage or her upbringing. And what was interesting is watching them and watching Hannah over the years as she came out and as an artist, as she navigated, playing in Portland, playing in San Diego, playing in LA, no problem, playing in Kansas City, another whole deal, and her and watching what's been happening in the environment. And so, and being a person, that I am, I play golf and I do all the, white guy things. And sitting there with, hearing over the years, the jokes, I said, no more. And I quite enjoy it now because anybody, if anything starts coming up, I'll just start to really, proudly talk about, my daughter. And her wife and their journey and the whole thing. And so my whole point for mentioning that is this is a really important topic, and we're going to get into it more specifically, but more importantly, and the reason that I talked to Stan that I wanted to come down is everybody needs to be talking about it, but especially people that find themselves in positions of privilege, which is what leadership is about within our hierarchy. the research is very clear, is that the one with authority, the one with responsibility, the one with privilege, in order to create the environment that allows our employees to be engaged, is we need to reach down and we need to extend and grant grace through our privilege. And we need to provide an opportunity to share the privilege in addition to getting things done, at work. And for me, it's like it's a sacred, really important responsibility. And I've got another whole talk, and I talked about last night, which is about, like why it's good for business. And even for people, cranky CFOs or whatever, that actually think this stuff is the squishy stuff, they're wrong, actually. Because the things that they want, which is an organization with people that are engaged, an organization with people, the 5 things we look at, the people that understand and they're committed to delivering a high performance, that they want to stay as long as they can, they're going to bring their discretionary energy, they're going to cooperate with their coworkers, and they're going to say positive things about the leadership and about the organization for which they work. Those things only occur when people feel safe, they feel valued, and they feel like what they're doing is useful. And what the events of George Floyd and everything since there did is it uncovered that which has been going on forever. And once something is uncovered and once it's out in the light, you can no longer look away from it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time about not only about privilege, but we're also going to get into some other aspects, and I'm going to give you all a chance to kind of interact with this, because to me, it's a fundamental issue, because you probably are too. I'm for everybody. I want everybody to be able to stand up who they are and not have things under the table that they're covering or they're hiding up or they don't feel like they can bring out because it's unsafe. And the list that we're going to look at is as long as your arm and growing every day. But what's amazing is once we can bring those things up and we can understand and connect with each other at a human level, what happens is they cease to matter as much, because we put everything up on the table. So, with that, let me just talk about privilege a little bit. I don't want to talk about, everybody knows the definition, but we have it, earned and unearned, right? Who doesn't have unearned privilege, things that are handed to you, Earned for sure, whatever we actually accomplish in life. And just the fact that we're here in this country, in this room, and you all are learning, it's a demonstration of privilege. If you drove here in an automobile, if you actually, show up reasonably well attired, ready to go. I mean, these are incredible elements. So there's things that are here that can provide us with significant or even subtle, trade wins. And so covering is a little different, but it's the act of privilege is kind of those things that we are earned or granted. Covering is the thing that I was doing with my son and with my daughter Hannah, and other ones that I have, which is downplaying, a stigmatized identity. And so many people report that they're covering things at work. They're leaving something in the car, right? So, examples. These are, the African Americans, 79% are covering. LGBTQ, 83%. Covering the behaviors, not feeling safe to talk about who they are because they'll receive some kind of known or unknown consequences now or down the road, right? Women, it's hard to cover being a woman, but the idea of actually covering their true, having to adapt sometimes into the culture in a way that actually causes them to feel like they're leaving a part of themselves, at home. I mean, it's so true that I can behave in a way, and they say, yeah, he's tough, he's fired up, isn't that great, And my wife can behave in the same way, and you know what they're going to call her, right? And it starts with B. So it's unbelievable. Latinx, Asian Americans, people with disabilities, everybody, is engaged in covering. And what's also really interesting to me is white men cover too. And one of the ones that makes me sometimes chuckle is I'm a Democrat, or I grew up poor, my wife makes more money than me, I'm secretly a feminist, all sorts of things that we're covering. And So the question, and I want you guys to just talk about it at your tables for a minute. When you think about the last few years, and you think about yourself in a position of authority or responsibility, and this is one of the big things that I've talked about, and I've talked about a lot with my father, is these days, is he more concerned with getting it right and figuring out the way to get into the conversation so we can figure out a way that he can actually get everybody to put things on the table that they're covering up and kind of really relate to who we are? Or is he worried more about not getting it wrong? Because a lot of times if you lean into it, it's really hard to get it right. You know, and I've got 4 kids that are all 2 millennials and 2 the next generation, and it's a sport within my family is to catch, you know, Madeline and myself, you know, getting it wrong, and it's always, and what I've learned to do is just lean in and say, help me understand how to get it right. Where did that term from? You know, because it's really interesting as the language is changing, and the one that's I have the most fun is my nephew who's 18 now, you know, and it's literally, it's like it feels to me like it's a hobby to figure out how we can find ways to point out that I'm not quite at getting it right. But what's interesting is I keep leaning in and I keep coming back and saying, tell me more, teach me more, help me understand how I can actually say it in a way that makes sense. So take just about 2 minutes, turn to a partner and talk about this issue of, as right now, either for yourself or the people that you work with and for in the senior levels, do you feel like getting it right in the organization is more important, or for individuals, or do you feel like getting it wrong, not getting it wrong is more of a motivator that's maybe keeping us from acting? Okay, let me grab your attention up front here. Thanks. I forgot to share with you the hand because we're going to do a couple more conversations. So next time we do it, I'm just going to raise my hand when I'm ready for you to stop. And then if you would just see me if you raise your hand and then stop talking, and it'll happen immediately. for anybody who does any training or facilitation room, there's an instructional design like paradigm behind that, is you really want to interrupt the conversation just because it goes over the peak, so that you can actually kind of catch it when the learning starts to decline, but more importantly, stay in control of the group. But also of the timing. So anyway, so anybody? I'd love to get 2 or 3 responses. What did you talk about? What came clear about this question? Is it more critical to like move towards getting it right or not getting it wrong? What was your thought about that? Okay, not all at once. Okay, yes.
We had robust conversation about not getting it wrong being maybe more of a fear-based, decision-making pattern, and getting it right is what I would choose.
Yeah.
Getting it right is more engaging than not getting it wrong is more conservative and not as engaging with everybody.
Has anybody actually been more worried about like not said something because you didn't want to get it right versus get it wrong versus getting it right? That's the getting it right. Yeah. So you guys have felt that before.
He was talking about, our camp was, yes, I want to get it right. Of course, we want to do it right, but we're not perfect, so I know I'm going to get it wrong, but not getting it wrong that it's offensive or, all those type of things that you think about all the time now. So that's kind of why we picked B on that.
Yeah. And you don't want to get it really wrong because then you could get canceled.
Yep.
Literally. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
One issue is that we're such a litigious society that, there's a lot of companies that are, they're on the razor's edge of making it or not making it, where if they get it wrong, that could sink the company.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Where the leaders probably or genuinely would like to get it right, but the downside risk of getting it wrong could be catastrophic. Now you've got people don't have jobs anymore, things like that.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
I was just going to say, also, getting it right could mean something different for lots of different people. So you're getting it right for what you think is right, but that might not be right for all.
Perfect. Yes.
So what came to my mind was the idea that seek first to understand before being understood. So the idea that going to my peers, and especially my direct reports, and ask them how I'm doing, or about an idea, what do they think about this idea, what do they think about my idea, so that I don't get it wrong. To me, understanding how not to get it wrong is the gateway to getting it right.
Yeah, that's a great point, for sure. So, how about one more? Yes.
For me, B, not getting it wrong, is about looking at yourself and not wanting to make a mistake, be defensive, whereas A makes it about other people and wanting to listen and learn.
Yeah.
And so it's looking inward and thinking, how do I not make myself look bad, versus how do I be empathetic, how do I do the courageous thing as a leader, and learn other perspectives and people's backgrounds.
Yeah. So as a raise of hands, have you ever in the last couple years had the regret of not trying to get it right, and as a result you just sat silent? Yes. Yeah. That's the tricky one. In most situations, it kind of goes down the middle. For me, 99% of the time when I'm upset with what I did, I overacted. I said something too soon. I said something too bold. But then I've got 2 kids that whenever they make a mistake, almost every time, 90% of the time, they didn't say something. They didn't act. They sat on their hands. And so they feel like the guilt of not saying something, where I'm always feeling the guilt of having done too much. It goes by people. And I'm not sure where you sit on that, but a lot of employees that I have, they're much more likely to have the regret of not saying something. And then for me, that's an indication of, boy, I need to really figure a way to make sure that I shut up and I try to draw out of them what they're thinking so they don't leave the meeting regretting it. And then sometimes that requires that myself and the people that have no problem, putting it out there, that we learn to kind of quiet down so we can create the dialogue. So it's an interesting issue. And I'll tell you, when I talk to a lot of people that are in senior levels, people that look like me, people like my father, he's been stung a few times, and he's like, you know what? I'd rather just pull back because it's not any fun to try to figure it out because I feel like it just is really beyond him a little bit, right? So it's tricky. So, well, I'm going to just kind of dig into this a little bit, and then we're actually going to do some work here. And pull your phones out. I know everybody has one because we're going to use it in a second. So, in terms of identities, you know, the ones that are above the waterline, you know, there's more than this, but they're observable, right? We can see these things. And it's important, you know, and a lot of the dialogue is around that, what it feels like to look different than everybody else, you know, in the room. But below the waterline, and we've been growing this list, there's a million things. Language of spoken, veteran status, race, communication style, disability, trauma, you know, trauma that people have no idea that you've been through. Lived experiences, education, grief, and loss. I was raising my voice around a lot of frustration with a guy just a week ago because it's a contractor, right? And near the end of the job. It's the last like 5%. So you've all probably like been there. And in the middle of like kind of his retort, he apologized and said, my brother was killed in Israel last week. And then he went on and said other things. And I said, stop, stop, Barack. Like, let's talk, you know, and we talked for like 45 minutes about that. And it was, you know, I had no idea, I had no idea what was going on. And it was, you know, I felt terrible, but at the same time, I was like, what are you doing working? And I felt like the conversation we had was a really useful conversation for him, right? So sober and in recovery, you know, conviction history of talent, single parent, chronic health issues, gender identity, body or food issues, socioeconomic status, survivor. We have a woman who works for us that was in that mass shooting in Vegas during the country thing about 7 or 8 years ago. Every time I see her, I know, but so many people have come since she's joined. You know, it's one of those things that's like an amazing thing for her to survive. So there's just a ton of different things. So if you get your phone out, we're going to do a little work here in the room. And if you can hit the QR code, we're going to use Menti, and we're going to do 4 quick polls. And the first one is, which of the following parts of your identity do you personally spend the most energy downplaying? You can only pick one. So look carefully. We've got age, family giver. Oh, it'll come up on your app. Is it working? Yes. Yeah. So you can only pick one item, and you can just start to vote. Let's see what we have here. What's the thing that you spend more energy downplaying than anything else? If you need to walk up, feel free. And of course, I can't see what that first one is. We're sitting here. Ability? Ability, okay. Okay, next one. So we're just going to leave this. But then the next question is related to this. And here it is. Type in a couple words about why you selected the item you selected. It's going to populate up here in just a second. Just a couple words. If you selected age or mental health or ability, just a couple words about your reason for selecting that. They should be more showing than that. Huh. Well, we didn't test that part of it. So why don't we work with what we have here? So financial stress, I'm more than my age assumes, workplace envy, imposter syndrome, appear too young for my position, preserve limitations, getting older. So many reasons why we're covering just in this room. What's amazing to me is every time I've done this, mental health and age have been top. Every time. Which is a really interesting deal. And the age one is both, I feel like I'm being judged for being young. And everybody thinks I've got a silver spoon, everything you would say about a millennial, I feel like I'm being judged for being too old, and I want people to know that I'm 58, because they'll write me off. I mean, every single time I do something, I'm very good with technology. I've been in technology forever. But people in my own company, they're always like, they're talking to me like my mother, who's 80, she called herself like a digital, not even an immigrant. She's not even fluent, right? And it's an interesting thing how you get assumed, or that because you're older, you're stuck, or whatever. So it's a really interesting deal. All right, so we're going to shift gears. We're going to do two more real quick.
Just so you know, Scott, you have a pager on there, so I do wonder, if you, I don't know, the touch screen, you usually see all the other responses if you swipe.
So the forward and backward arrow bottom.
Yeah, you see the page.
That's actually moving the slides forward because the slide is sitting in Menti. We use another platform usually. This is one we use, so I'll be able to send out. I'll be able to get the results and I can send them to everybody. Which is pretty amazing to see. There's the next question. Within the organization or the organizations you serve, the first one was about you. What do you think that the employees at your organization are spending the most time downplaying, minimizing, or hiding in the workplace? And then, of course, we're going to do a quick tell us more, and then we're going to break into some discussions at your table. I'm good. Wow. Boy, mental health is taking off here. Isn't that amazing? Let's shift to the next one just to give you some time to type in your answers. Tell us more about what you selected and the impact, it's really on your people. The reason that you think people are selecting, whether you selected that on their behalf. Basically, why did mental health come up for almost everybody here? Okay, at your table, and I think if you have a bunch, maybe you can break up into groups of 2 or 3, because the whole table will be hard. But let's talk for about 5 or so minutes around, for you, and also for the people in the organization or the ones that you serve, what are the things that are driving the choices you made? Okay, obviously a lot of conversations about mental health, it seems, age, but then there was a bunch of other very important items. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to talk about it, and then I'll get a couple responses, and then we're going to kind of keep moving forward, okay? Really, by the way, I really appreciate everybody participating in this, because it's just amazing. In this room of privilege, doing a very privileged thing, look what's come up, right? Look what's come up. I just got a question. Do we talk about ourselves or others? Yes. Yeah, but both. Whatever you want to, whatever this brought up for you, at the top of the surface, talk about it, okay? Do you know how that works? It's actually when the people that are talking and not paying attention to what people's hands are going up, as soon as they start to hear the decibels go down, then they word up. So everybody has the senses to notice stuff, even if you're engaged in something else, kind of related to the topic. Would anybody like to share about kind of what you discussed or what was meaningful about your conversation. Yes, Gary.
So we were talking about the bucket of the word mental health, which I think is dangerous. I think mental health, we think mental health is a subset of well-being. And, you know, someone can say, I have an issue with mental health. Well, what does that really mean? But I think the bigger thing is, are we aware of our well-being in the organisation, which could be because we have a mental health issue, it could be because we broke our toe, it could be because we blah, blah, blah. So I think it's kind of dangerous, and maybe it's, in a way, causing people to, what did you call it, cover?
Yeah, yeah,
Because I don't want to talk about mental health because I don't have a mental health issue. Well, maybe you don't, but maybe you have a well-being issue.
right.
That was something.
It's a great point, and I think the notion, and one of my father's colleagues from UMass back 40 years ago has been working in the field of wellness forever, and it was one of those things that, you know, he always said, you know, we can't afford what was the thing? You can't afford to take care of yourself, but you can afford the time to be sick and all of a sudden miss work or actually, you know, so there's the whole idea about how do we get in front of it, and the idea of well-being and supporting well-being, you know, as a company and all sorts of things is really a great one. And it's a really interesting topic. Is it about you? Is it about somebody else? You know, is it a worry that's coming from, you know, something that you understand and you're working with, that you deal with, or something that's unknown that you're concerned about? So it's a really big and important topic. So today's meant to, like, maybe lean in and think. You know, one of the things that's caused for me is to notice when I know somebody and all of a sudden they're not performing, and I hear this person may be putting on some kind of a performance plan. One of my things is, that makes no sense. I mean, that's a person that's never seen a performance plan in their life, like what's going on, and actually finding out that there's a cancer in the family, or there's something going on with one of their kids, or that there's something that's not being disclosed at work, which is sapping their ability to do what they've always done. You know, so having a word on that is really important. So thanks for that, Gary. Other comments? Yes.
I can engage in the discussion how some of either us or our family members are going through a mental health situation, and leaning into the conversation sometimes is difficult.
Yeah.
And be able to be vulnerable, and we impact more the people as we continue to share, because they may not have the language to say, oh, that's what I have.
Yeah.
You know, at a personal level, I've been involved with mental health for 35 years, marry a physician who's involved with psychiatrists, and dual diagnosis, drug and alcohol, so I volunteer, hospital, stuff like that. So a common language becomes, so I have a daughter, and she would talk about, oh my God, this person is so obsessive compulsive. Well, I have obsessive compulsive traits. I'm like, oh my God, I welcome that, you know? But you have to have a language to be able to describe how you're feeling, and the only way to do it is if you lean into it.
Yeah.
like we discussed.
For sure. Thank you for that. Yeah. How about one more? Okay, I'm going to, yes, Stan.
We talked about spirituality or religion, not revealing that in the workplace, and it's aligned with politics.
Mhm.
Those two seem to be connected in our current culture. And to focus more on what brings us together as a way of doing the right thing, to leaning into the commonality versus starting out with something that's likely to be divisive.
Yeah. I mean, religion and politics, we're taught not to bring it up as a dinner table when we grew up, and it's the things that, you know, they really, really, you know, raise all sorts of issues. One of our clients, Cal Fire, the number of incidents they've had around, you know, things showing up in the workplace, you know, they would have had a suit about how many MAGA cups are you allowed to have on your you know, your cubicle. And when they said that's just offensive, and then they brought the guy in, they're like, well, the reason I have so many is because of what happened at the last election, and I had one, and I was ostracized, and it's like a whole big, it's a really, really, you know, tricky issue, you know, and I think you have to choose, you know, how to deal with it. So I'm going to share a framework, because we were really struggling with when we looked at what to even do about this, Because what happens a lot of times is you bring the topic up and actually more awareness is created, but then there's a lot of times more confusion and there's more of less of a sense of what can you actually do about anything. And so what we did is we partnered up with a woman named Jennifer Brown who's dedicated her life to it, and she's got a framework, and we built a program around it. And the idea is that every human being has a unique point of view across a spectrum of identity dimensions. And I love the framework because what it really says is, or shows, is that on any topic that I can be unaware completely of an issue, I can be aware, but I haven't crossed over to going public and being actually active and having moderate knowledge and a willingness to speak about it. When you cross over, you're actually a willingness to ask the question or speak or listen, and then you get to a place, you know, of advocacy where you're actually, it's part of your purpose to actually advocate for that identity dimension, which is important to you or your family or something that you've really dealt with. And so what's wonderful about the framework is it enables everybody to look at, first, your points of privilege, you know, and to what degree are you, you know, where do you sit on the points of privilege that you have? And when other people look at it, what do they know? You know, because a lot of times I am who I am. I'm a 58-year-old like white guy, right? But there's people that a lot of times make assumptions, or maybe they're over here about what does that actually mean, or they'll make assumptions about my political persuasion and my religious persuasion, and I'm actually walking in and I'm actually, you know, I don't actually like the guy. I hate him, in fact, and I'm actually not in that party either, you know, so it's like one of those kind of things. So it's a really interesting idea to begin to look at those different dimensions and see where you sit and where you want to go. Like, for example, with my daughter Hannah, I'm really in a position of being both active and advocate in terms of supporting, you know, her life, her rights, her basically, you know, kind of the rights for her to have a really happy, you know, life full of, you know, of good stuff and not being scared, right? And she's lesbian. I don't have a gay son, so it's different. Similar, but different. But I don't have as much experience, you know, nor drive to talk about it because it's not part of my personal experience. Hannah herself, and a lot of my gay and lesbian friends, when it gets to other members of the LGBTQ community, they don't have as much understanding or even advocacy for the groups that they're not part of, right? So it varies by dimension. Ageism, I have a lot of a sense from my parents and my experience of what does it feel like to be offered, you know, 10% off groceries when I go buy them on Wednesday because I look old enough to get the discount, right? And you know, it's like, are you going to card me for that? And then also really knowing a lot about the millennial situation for a while because it's such a huge part of our workforce. But everybody has their own experience about age. And ability and every other dimension. So it's a really great framework to begin to look at each different area. And so in the center is knowledge and engagement. And like, boy, I'm in an area where it's really awkward for me to have that conversation. How do I understand that and begin to move up and begin to learn more and begin to get into a dialogue where I can begin to ask some questions so I can actually lean in? But from a place of, didn't really get what was going on. Now that I do, help me understand. Teach me something about your experience so I can actually lean in. Or I've been thinking about this for a while. This is how I'm trying to language it. Is that working? You get, you know, or you get to a place where you really become, you know, a staunch advocate for the group. Any comments or questions about the framework? Because for me, it's a model you can put on the table with people, and you can begin to at least figure out, like, I'm there on that dimension. You can figure out how we're all coming from different places around each of the different issues.
Scott, how would an organization employ this model?
It's really through an experience of a little bit of what we went through, and one is to explore, you know, privilege, earned and unearned, so people actually have an opportunity to understand the different points of view that people have around privilege, not to solve it, but to understand, of course, that it exists in the workplace, and then a lot of times it's more powerful than we may think, and it creates a lot of assumptions. And then the second thing is actually to go through the experience of looking at what are those factors of identity that are known, and then those things that are underneath, and give people an opportunity to surface kind of what's going on. I think with given this breaking up, we put mental health in a bucket, but I think you could bucket that into a couple categories. If you selected mental health, we could probably do another survey to kind of find out like what's going on, to give everybody an experience. And what we do in our program is we have a lot of, this is the content, but most of it is actually engaging in dialogue around the framework, in a safe place, so people get to a place where we can take things that are under the table and bring them up, onto the table and begin to talk about them. Yes.
The question I have is, it would seem first look that perhaps you want to get the advocate on all these issues. But if you go back to your iceberg chart, there's so many that, that people are asking. You couldn't possibly be an expert in all of them. So I'm trying to figure out from a learning and development perspective across an organization, how to use this.
To me, the first one is to move from unaware to aware around the whole spectrum of things, and realize that there's a lot more things, and the list is growing every day in terms of things that people are covering or not bringing to work. And acknowledge the other one is every single one of them is legitimate. And so if you believe that you are for people, which I'm sure most of you sitting in the room do, then the question is, which are the ones that you're not willing to, are there any issues that you can't put up on the table because of your experience, because of your morality, because of the way you came up, because of your religious background, because of your thought patterns? Are there areas where you need to maybe look in the mirror and challenge your own thinking about some of that? I did that completely with talking about my son, because I really felt like that was something that, it was through that experience with Darryl McDaniel when he said people go that way, that way. I'm like, that's right. That's me. I'm the one that's actually suffering in silence and actually not talking about it, and not letting people in. And therefore, and as I've let people in, I found out that everybody is touched by situations around Uncle Sally, Uncle Dad, their mom, their dad, their first, and then you start finding out. I found out about people that were, had several more marriages than I understood, and the reasons that they fell apart. It is a thing to get through this life, right? So that's the first piece, is can you move up to aware, and then from there, I think as leaders, the fundamental responsibility is to realize that you have the power, you have the responsibility to care for the people that are leading you, and that if you can't or won't, maybe can't before, but now it's won't, find a way to enter into the conversation so people can bring their whole selves to work as much as is possible, then I feel like that's a failure. Number two, I actually feel like it's a challenge to figure out how can you, with who you are, get into the conversation versus act as if it's not necessary or it's not important. Or you know what? When I was young, we used to come to work and just leave our problems in the car, and we would come in and we'd do our job and go the heck home, right? And that's great, and if it's a different world, that it once was. And I also know, if this is the age one for me, that as soon as we find ourselves in a position of complaining about the next generation behind us, then we join the people that have been doing that in publications for the last 450 years. People complaining about the generation coming up. I've got a great quote about people complaining about the generation, which was the greatest generation, which was the World War II people. So it always happens. And for me, it's a poor carpenter that blames their tools, and it's a poor manager that blames their people. And I don't think it's a great leader that actually blames the upcoming generation who you're supposed to be not only caring for, but engaging. Because I think this next generation is awesome, and they're going to make an amazing thing happen. They're just not going to take the same crap that my generation did.
Well, and interaction between the generations.
Yeah, so that's my 2 cents. So I actually feel like it's an obligation. So I see a hand back there.
Just two comments. One, thank you so much for this topic. It really, really touched my heart, and really great.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, here's my, my last question, because I just looked down and I'm over time and I don't want to run over, even though I have a bit. But here's the big question, you know, is what is the cost of not having an inclusive culture to your organization? And one of the things that we know is and Peter Drucker got it right, the only things that naturally happen in organizations is the creation of fear, frustration, inefficiency, friction, and political mayhem. When people come together without a beacon, without purpose, without some kind of a positive focus, all the bad things happen as human beings. And that's a natural deal. And so if we're not advancing the case, if we're not moving good towards productive ends, then what happens is things are going to get messy. They're just going to get messy. So if we're not moving in today's definition and what it's going to mean next week towards creating an inclusive culture, then what's going to happen is, by definition, your culture is going to become notable by being less inclusive this year than it was last year. If you're doing the same things that you were before the George Ford thing happened, you know what? You are way behind, because the world moved. The expectations moved. The pressure shifted. You know, so it's a really, really important, you know, business thing. So the idea of, like, you know, it's either this or profits, you know, that's, you know, to me, as my father always said, profit, this is research backed, by the way, and I'll send you the papers, but profit, you know, sustainable economic value comes from taking care of your people and your people taking care of your customers, and the bar and the standard is shifted. And also at the same time, I'm not up here saying that it's just about this, because what's interesting is if we can get it behind us, then we can get focused on the work at hand, which is serving the customer, right? And actually helping them advance. So it's not just a social cause, but it's actually those two things are required. And what leaders need to do is they need to create focus and then deep meaning and devotion at the same time in their staff and through their leaders. It's a combination of the two. And it's a really, really important thing that we're moving the bar on this. And so here's my one challenge, and it's very small. I thought it was going to be larger. Really interesting question here. Is it possible to have an inclusive culture if the CEO is not an advocate for creating diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and actually creating an organization that's leaning in rather than leaning apart? It's a big question, and I'll tell you, the research bears it out that the CEO, their largest impact is on the top management team's climate, and the top management team tends to vary towards fear-based or cooperation-based, and if they go towards fear-based, then you're on the path to not realizing your full potential in your technology, in your service, in your product, because that's the thing that creates politics and all sorts of things. So with that, I'm going to leave you with this final question, but I'm hoping that there's some kind of an insight that came from today that may be significant for you, the organization you work for, or the organizations that you serve. So, thanks. Cool.